Hello and welcome to another special episode of World Traveler Cooking. This time, I've decided to show a fundamental, which is how to make a shortcrust pie crust. Now, in this case, we are making it for a bottom crust only pie, but you know, I'll have ingredients and proportions listed in case you want to do a top and bottom also. Keep in mind that in different places, pie pans are different sizes, and consequently, you may need to vary the proportions a little bit. Standard shortcrust pie crust, people usually add a little sugar. I don't. I'm going to explain why quickly. Sugar, very much like salt, is a flavor enhancer, and I try to keep flavor enhancers out of the crust because I found that particularly if you have a relatively subtle filling, then you end up tasting the crust a lot more than you'd like. Pie crust is nice, but the flavor isn't usually what we're looking for, it's usually the texture. So consequently, I leave the salt, I leave the sugar out of the pie crust. You're welcome to do it differently, but I'm telling you why I've made the decision to do it the way I do it. So, proportions for bottom one only are 300 grams of flour, 80 grams of butter, and we'll have some ice water. Basically, I just take a glass of water, I put it in the freezer, and we'll poke a hole in the ice on the top when we're ready for it, and we'll pour it out at basically a tablespoon or so at a time when we're ready. We need this water to be super cold, so we're going to keep it at freezing temperature the whole time we're working with it. I like to do it this way because I think that it's easier to manage. At any rate, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and we'll cut the butter into pieces, we'll mix it with the flour until we get something kind of like a sandy consistency, and then we'll add water slowly to make a pliable dough. Very, very, very simple, but it's one of those things that a lot of people don't know how to do. So they go and they buy pie crust, but you'll get better ones if you make your own. Let's get started. So some people want to have it like, if you want it to be super flaky, maybe you just want to have, maybe you don't want it as heavily mixed. But I'll be back once I have all this mixed well. And we will, then I can add the water and you'll see that step. But I prefer a more mixed one. You can make it how you like it. If you don't like as well mixed a dough, then my recommendation is refrigerate it heavily before you roll it out, but even that can cause the dough to kind of delaminate during the rolling process. But you can see this actually doesn't take that much effort, and we're getting a consistency sort of like damp beach sand, and that's the consistency that we want. We want this to have, you know, we want it to just kind of clump together a little bit when we squeeze it. And yeah, I guess I won't need to come back in a few moments because this is pretty close to where we want it. We even have some of the pea-sized pieces that people sometimes want to see. So let's, I'm just going to mix that a little more. As I say, I like mine a little more mixed than other people. You can experiment around a little bit and decide what works for you. So now I'm going to start adding the water. I'm going to add about a tablespoon at a time. We don't want very much, and we want this to be really cold. And you're going to see that immediately it starts clumping together even more. And we're going to keep doing that until we have a pliable dough. It's not going to take that much water, but it will take some. Oops, that's probably a little more than I wanted. Let's see. We're getting there. A little more. A little more. Now, the key aspect here is that some gluten is forming just a little bit. This becomes more evident when you are making a pie that has a lot of liquid in it, like a rhubarb pie. But not a lot. We don't want this to be very glutinous, very tough. So we're getting pretty close here. But you'll see it's still not holding together much. So add a little more. And we should see it come together now. The butter coating the flour particles makes it so that we don't really form much gluten. Yeah, and here we have a fairly pliable dough. This is bordering on, and it's not very sticky. I think it needs just a little more kneading. Get the water everywhere it needs to go. Still falling apart a little bit. So maybe I will add just a tiny, tiny bit more water. Oh yeah, this is coming together nicely. And with this dough, if it seems a little sticky when you add the water, just knead it a little longer and the stickiness will go away. And here we have our dough. Next we'll roll it out, and yeah, this is looking nice. We'll roll it out and we'll put it in the tart pan and we will bake it in the oven for about 15 minutes. So then, to roll this out, I'm going to start in the middle. We're just going to, I like to just kind of keep my hands on top of the rolling pin. So this is something I learned from the French style rolling pins. I don't have one of right here. But we're just going to gently roll it, don't push too hard. And we're going to work on a piece of, I use baking paper or parchment. You can use wax paper if you're in the US. The goal is basically to get a disc of crust that'll overhang the pie pan by a bit. I'm using a French tart pan. And just basically just keep rolling. You want to get a nice even layer, so it's going to take a little bit of time. I'll be back when this is done, and we'll add it to the tart pan. All right, so now we have this big enough. So we're just going to take it on our paper, and we're going to put it over the top. And usually, what I like to do is to kind of press it in place with in the paper. This means lifting it up so that you're not just stretching and possibly breaking the dough, and sliding it into place. And part of the reason I like to do it this way is that the paper provides some extra structure, and consequently it helps prevent tearing the dough as much. So once we have this kind of pressed in place, we will pull the paper off, and here's our basic pie crust. Now, of course, sometimes you're going to find cases like this, where either it's torn or it isn't reaching as far as we want, and we'll talk about how to handle that in a second. So the first thing to note is we want like about 1 centimeter or so extra above. So we can take some areas which are way beyond that, and we can cut some off. And so in cases like we have right here, where we have a little bit of a tear, we can actually put a little bit of a patch on it. We can just put a patch, we can press it in with our fingers like this, and that will seal it in. It'll be fine, nobody's going to notice. And then you can do the same thing on the top areas where you don't have enough. Just take a bit, press it in, and we will basically do that a few places around here, and then we'll shape the top. So, I think I'll go ahead and show the beginnings of shaping the top. What we do is we pinch it over like this, and we try to get a very nice even crust on the top. And this also allows us to improve some of our mending processes and things like that. But I'll be back when this is done. Probably couldn't see my fingers there, so I'll move it a bit further. Basically what we'll do is we will fold it over and kind of make a nice lip. And this is an opportunity to kind of mend the dough a little bit. And in cases where we have too much, we can just tear a little bit off. Set it aside for cases where we need a repair. And we just keep doing this. And I will be back as soon as I have all this done. The next very important step is to poke the bottom. The reason is, as this bakes, air bubbles will form and push the bottom of the crust up. And regardless of what you're using to weight this down, you will have a problem with air bubbles distorting your crust. So, we're going to do this. Then we've got to put in some sort of weight. People often use dry beans. I'll use something. And then we're going to bake this at 425 Fahrenheit or about 210 Celsius for 15-20 minutes. And then this will be ready for use. Now, of course, in many pies, you'd actually fill it and bake it, and then you don't have to worry about pie weights. Okay, so now for the baking stage, I'm going to carefully put this baking paper back in. You can use aluminum foil. And again, you could use pie weights, but I'm going to use rice in this case. Just going to put a couple of cups of rice here. And this will go in the oven. The purpose of the pie weights is to make sure that we don't have the pie crust come up. And then, as I say, I will use this. I'll use this rice for something specific in the next week. So here we go. This will go in the oven. So here we are. Now in Indonesia it is considered bad luck to waste rice, so I will be funneling this into a jar, and I will be attempting to cook this rice normally and see how it comes out. Might end up coming out a little more like porridge, but that's all right. And here we have our lovely pie crust. So here's a short crust pie crust, and yeah, here we go.